The rain wasn't peaceful. It wasn't that cinematic drizzle that makes you want to curl up with a book. It was a violent, slashing downpour that blurred the world outside our floor-to-ceiling windows. I stood in the kitchen, my hands trembling as I held a lukewarm cup of tea, listening to the sound of suitcases dragging across the hardwood floor. Thud, thud, thud. Each step Elias took felt like a hammer nail being driven into the coffin of our 12-year marriage. He didn't even look at me. He was focused on the door, his eyes bright with a frantic, terrifying kind of newness. "Elias," I whispered. My voice sounded thin, like paper tearing. "Our daughter is upstairs. She's sleeping. How do I explain this to her tomorrow morning?" He stopped. He finally looked at me, but his gaze was cold. Worse than cold, it was indifferent. "Tell her I had to go, Clara. Tell her I found something I couldn't walk away from." "Something?" I let out a jagged laugh. "You mean someone. You're leaving a life we built for a woman you've known for 6 months? A woman who doesn't know you hate the crusts cut off your sandwiches? Who doesn't know how you wake up screaming from nightmares about your father?" He gripped the handle of his bag tighter. "Maya understands a version of me you've tried to kill for a decade. She sees the man I am now, not the boy you're still trying to mother." The sting of that was physical. I felt the air leave my lungs. For 10 years, I had supported his business, stayed up until 3 a.m. editing his proposals, and held his hand through every failure. And now he was calling that mothering. He opened the front door. A gust of wind sent a spray of freezing rain into the foyer. "Don't do this," I said, my voice rising. "If you walk out that door tonight, Elias, there is no later. There is no let's talk when things calm down. You are choosing her over your family, over everything." He didn't hesitate. He didn't even flinch. He just stepped out into the dark. "I already chose, Clara. I chose 3 months ago." The door slammed. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever heard. I stood there, staring at the wood grain of the door, waiting for it to open again, waiting for him to realize he'd made a mistake. 5 minutes. 10. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the rain hitting the glass. I looked down at my tea. It was cold. I walked to the sink and poured it out, watching it swirl down the drain. My life felt like that tea. Something that was once warm and comforting, now just a waste to be washed away. I thought about going upstairs to check on Sophie, but I couldn't move. My legs felt like lead. I slumped onto the floor, right there in the middle of the kitchen, surrounded by the shadows of the life we used to have. How did we get here? How does a man go from promising to grow old with you to leaving you in the middle of a storm for a woman half his age? I thought I knew him. I thought we were the golden couple. Everyone told us we were. But as I sat there, the memories started to shift. Small things. The way he'd started hiding his phone. The late nights at the office. The way he stopped mentioning my name in front of his new colleagues. I had seen the red flags, but I had woven them into a rug and walked right over them. Now the rug was pulled out, and I was falling. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over his name. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to beg. I wanted to tell him that Maya, this soulmate, was just a temporary fix for his midlife crisis. But then a notification popped up. A photo. An Instagram post from an account I shouldn't have been following. It was a picture of a candlelit dinner, 2 glasses of wine, and a caption that read, "Finally, the life I was meant to live. No more hiding." The timestamp? 10 minutes ago. He hadn't even reached her house yet, and he was already celebrating my erasure. My heart didn't just break. It hardened. I didn't cry. The tears just dried up, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. He thought he was leaving me behind to start a better life. He thought I was the anchor dragging him down. What he didn't realize was that I wasn't the anchor. I was the foundation. And when you rip a house off its foundation, the whole thing eventually collapses. I stood up, wiped my face, and walked to the window. I watched the tail lights of a car, maybe his, maybe a stranger's, disappear into the gray abyss of the rain. "Okay, Elias," I whispered to the empty room. "You chose. Now watch me choose." I went to the hall closet and pulled out a heavy-duty shredder. I had work to do, but as I reached for the first folder of our joint finances, I heard a small voice from the top of the stairs. "Mom, where's Daddy going with his suitcases?" My blood turned to ice. I looked up. Sophie was standing there, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide with a fear I wasn't ready to face. I looked at Clara. She was only 6, clutching that ragged rabbit like it was the only solid thing left in the world. How do you tell a child that the person who tucked her in every night just traded her for a fresh start? My heart felt like it was being squeezed by a cold hand, but I couldn't break. Not yet. "Daddy just needs some space, honey," I lied. The words tasted like ash. "He has a lot of work to do, so he's staying somewhere else for a little while. Come here." She ran to me, burying her face in my neck. She smelled like lavender shampoo and innocence. As I held her, I looked over her shoulder at the empty space where Weston's shoes usually sat. The house already felt different, hollowed out. I carried her back to bed, humming a song I didn't even recognize, waiting until her breathing slowed and her grip on my hand loosened. When I finally stepped back into the hallway, the silence was waiting for me. I walked down to Weston's office. I hadn't been in there in weeks. He'd started locking it, claiming he was working on confidential contracts. The door was ajar. He'd been in such a rush to get to her that he'd forgotten his own rules. I pushed the door open. The room smelled like his cologne, sandalwood and arrogance. I sat at his desk and opened the top drawer. I wasn't looking for love letters. I was looking for the truth. And I found it buried under a stack of old tax returns. It was a folder from a local real estate agent. Inside were photos of a penthouse downtown. High ceilings, glass walls, a view of the city that cost more than our mortgage. But it wasn't the price that stopped my heart. It was the date on the lease agreement. He'd signed it 4 months ago. He hadn't just fallen in love recently. He'd been building a parallel life while eating the dinners I cooked and sleeping in the bed I made. Every "I love you," every "I'm just tired from work," was a calculated move to keep me quiet until he was ready to jump. But then I saw a sticky note attached to the back of the lease. It was a series of numbers, account numbers I didn't recognize. And next to them, a name. Ava. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain outside. Ava wasn't just the woman he left me for. She was the person he was transferring our daughter's college fund to. I stared at the screen of my laptop, my fingers hovering over the keys of our joint bank account. I logged in, my breath hitching. The balance was lower, much lower, than it should have been. Thousands of dollars were missing, bled out in small, inconspicuous increments. He didn't just leave us. He was trying to bankrupt us on his way out. I sat back in the leather chair, the shadows of the room closing in. I could hear the rain tapering off, replaced by the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. Tick, tick, tick. Time was running out. If he realized he'd left this door open, he'd be back. Or he'd finished the job from his phone. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just reached for my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. My cousin, Marcus. He wasn't just family. He was the best forensic accountant in the state. "Marcus," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I need you to look into something. And I need you to do it tonight." I hung up and looked at the photo of Weston on the desk. He was smiling, looking like the perfect husband. I took the frame, walked to the kitchen, and dropped it into the trash can. The battle lines weren't just drawn. They were etched in blood. He thought he'd taken everything. He forgot that I was the one who managed the books for his firm for the first 5 years. I knew where the bodies were buried, because I was the one who dug the graves. As the sun began to peek through the gray clouds of dawn, I realized something. Weston Blake didn't just leave a wife. He left the only person who knew how to protect him from himself. I heard a car pull into the driveway. My heart hammered against my ribs. Was he back? Did he forget something? I walked to the front window and pulled the curtain back just an inch. It wasn't Weston's sleek, black SUV. It was a car I'd never seen before. A woman stepped out, holding a manila envelope. She looked up at the house, her expression grim. She wasn't a mistress. She looked like a process server. I opened the door before she could even ring the bell. The morning air was crisp, smelling of wet pavement and reality. The woman didn't smile. She just handed me the envelope. "Clara Blake?" she asked. "Yes," I said, my voice sounding distant even to myself. "You've been served. Have a nice day." She turned and walked back to her car without a second glance. I stood on the porch, the heavy paper crinkling in my hand. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. Divorce papers. He hadn't even been gone for 8 hours, and he was already trying to legally erase me. I walked back inside and sat at the kitchen table. I tore open the envelope. It wasn't just a standard filing. He was suing for full custody of Clara. He was claiming I was emotionally unstable and unfit to provide a stable environment. A jagged, bitter laugh escaped my throat. Unstable? I was the one who stayed up through the night while he was out finding himself. I was the one who kept the lights on. But as I read further, the blood drained from my face. He had evidence. Photos of me at a pharmacy, photos taken from a distance. A list of prescriptions I'd filled last year after my mother passed away. He was using my grief, my darkest moment of mourning, as a weapon to take my child. He wasn't just leaving. He was trying to destroy me so completely that I wouldn't have the strength to fight back. "Mom?" Who was at the door? I jumped, quickly sliding the papers under a placemat. Clara was standing there in her mismatched pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "Just a delivery, sweetie," I said, forcing a smile that felt like it was cracking my skin. "Want some pancakes?" As I flipped the batter, my mind was racing at 1,000 miles an hour. I needed a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. I needed the kind of person people were afraid to see in a courtroom. But lawyers cost money, money that Weston was currently funneling into a penthouse for Ava. I looked at my wedding ring, a 3-carat diamond that Weston had insisted on buying when his firm took off. He'd said it was a symbol of our unbreakable bond. I twisted it off my finger. It left a pale, indented mark on my skin. It felt lighter than I expected. After breakfast, I dropped Clara off at her grandmother's house. My mother-in-law, Martha, looked at me with pity in her eyes. She knew. Of course she knew. Weston was her golden boy, and she had probably been coached on what to say. "Clara, dear," she started, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Weston he's going through a transition. Maybe if you hadn't been so focused on the house and the kid, he wouldn't have felt so smothered." I didn't argue. I didn't waste my breath. I just kissed Clara goodbye and drove straight to the most high-end jewelry buyer in the city. "I want to sell this," I told the man behind the counter. "And I want the payment in a cashier's check. Today." He looked at the ring, then at me. He could see the desperation, but he could also see the resolve. He offered me half of what it was worth. I didn't haggle. I just took the check. With that check in my purse, I drove to a nondescript office building on the edge of town. No fancy signs. No floor-to-ceiling windows. Just a door that said Vance and Associates. I walked in and met Sarah Vance. She was a woman in her 60s with eyes like a hawk. She didn't offer me coffee or a tissue. She just looked at the papers I laid on her desk. "He's playing dirty," she said, her voice a low rasps. "He's using a scorched earth policy. He wants you broken and alone." "Can you stop him?" I asked. She leaned back, a predatory smile touching her lips. "Stop him? No, Clara. We're not going to stop him. We're going to let him run. And while he's running, we're going to trip him." She pulled out a file. "I've been watching Weston's firm for a different client. Did you know he's been taking loans from his own company's pension fund to pay for that penthouse?" The room went still. Weston wasn't just a cheat. He was a thief. "He thinks he's the smartest man in the room," Sarah continued. "That's his biggest weakness. He thinks you're too hurt to look at the numbers. But we're going to look at every single cent." I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in years. Power. It wasn't the loud, shouting kind. It was a quiet, burning fuse. But then my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Clara, stay away from the office. Stay away from the bank. If you make this difficult, I'll make sure you never see Clara again. Just sign the papers and walk away with your dignity. W." I looked at Sarah. I didn't say a word. I just turned the phone around so she could see the screen. Dignity, Sarah whispered, shaking her head. He really doesn't know who he's dealing with, does he? 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of living in a house that felt like a crime scene. Weston hadn't called Sophie once. He sent a box of her favorite toys to Martha's house, but he couldn't even manage a 5-minute FaceTime. He was too busy transitioning. Every day, Marcus sent me more data. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck. Weston hadn't just taken money. He had forged my signature on several documents to secure a line of credit. He was using my credit score to fund his new life with Ava. He's over-leveraged, Marcus told me over the phone. He's betting everything on a big merger that's happening next month. If that merger goes through, he's golden. He repays the loans. The signatures are forgotten. And he walks away a hero. And if it doesn't? I asked. Then he's looking at prison time. The merger was being celebrated at a charity gala, the biggest social event of the year. Weston and Ava were planning to make their official debut as a couple there. He had even sent me a formal invitation, a cruel little jab to show me that he had the new life and I was just a ghost from his past. I'm going, I told Sarah. It's a Shark Tank, Clara, she warned. Everyone there is on his payroll or wants to be. I don't care. I need him to see me. The night of the gala, I didn't wear this sad ex-wife look. I wore a dress the color of midnight, simple and sharp. I did my own makeup, highlighting the bones of my face until I looked like a statue. I wasn't going there to beg. I was going there to witness the beginning of the end. The ballroom was a sea of silk and champagne. I saw him almost immediately. Weston looked radiant. He was wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than my first car. And Ava, she was younger, yes. She was wearing a dress that was practically dripping in gold. They were the center of the room, laughing, clinking glasses with the city's elite. I walked straight toward them. The crowd parted slightly as people recognized me. The whispers started instantly. Is that the wife? What is she doing here? Weston saw me. His smile didn't just fade. It vanished. He stepped forward, trying to block Ava from my view. Clara, he hissed, grabbing my arm. What the hell are you doing? I told you to stay away. It's a public event, Weston, I said, my voice calm and carrying. And since I'm still technically the CFO of record for your holding company, I thought I should be here for the big announcement. Ava stepped out from behind him, her eyes scanning me with a mix of curiosity and contempt. So this is her, she said, her voice high and brittle. The anchor you were talking about. I looked her in the eye. I didn't feel anger. I felt a strange kind of pity. He'll tell you the same thing about yourself in 5 years, Ava. Just keep an eye on the bank accounts. Weston's grip on my arm tightened. Get out. Now. Before I have security escort you out. You could do that, I said, leaning in close so only he could hear me. But then I might have to mention to Mr. Henderson, the man you're trying to merge with, about the loan you took from the employee pension fund. The one with my forged signature? Weston's face went gray. The sweat started to bead on his forehead. You're bluffing. You don't have proof. I pulled a small, folded piece of paper from my clutch. It was a copy of the forensic report Marcus had compiled. I don't just have proof, Weston. I have the paper trail. And Sarah Vance has the original. I pulled my arm out of his grasp. I looked around the room, at the people who had been my friends for a decade, people who were now looking away, embarrassed by the drama. Enjoy the party, Weston, I said loudly. It's going to be a very expensive memory. I turned and walked out of the ballroom. I didn't look back. I got into my car and sat in the silence for a long time. My heart was racing, but for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I checked my phone. A message from Sarah. The SEC just received the tip. Henderson's lawyers are already calling. The merger is dead. I started the engine. I had a long drive home, but the road felt wide open. But as I pulled out of the parking lot, my headlights caught a figure standing by the exit. It was Ava. She was alone, her gold dress looking dull under the streetlights. She looked terrified. And then she held up a hand, signaling for me to stop. I shifted the car into gear, my foot heavy on the gas, ready to leave the stench of that gala behind. But as my headlights swept across the exit, a figure stepped into the light. It was Ava, the mistress. The woman who was supposed to be celebrating her victory. Instead, she was shivering in that gold dress, her face streaked with mascara, clutching a designer bag as if it were a life preserver. I stopped the car. I didn't want to. Every cell in my body told me to drive over her shadow and never look back. But there was something in her eyes, a raw, frantic terror that I recognized. It was the look of someone who had just seen the monster behind the mask. I lowered the window. "What do you want, Ava? Haven't you taken enough for one night?" "He's leaving, Clara," she choked out, her voice barely a whisper against the wind. "He's leaving tomorrow morning, 6 a.m., a private flight to Dubai. And he's not taking me." I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. "And why are you telling me this?" "Because he's pinning it all on me," she said, stepping closer to the car, her hands shaking. "He's been moving money into accounts with my name on them for months. He told me it was an inheritance strategy. But I found his second phone tonight. I saw the messages to his lawyer. He's going to let the company collapse, let the feds arrest me for embezzlement, and disappear with the rest of the cash." She reached into her bag and pulled out a sleek, black encrypted drive. "He thinks I'm just a pretty face, Clara. He thinks I don't listen when he talks business on his private line. But I recorded everything. The passwords, the offshore account numbers, the forged signatures. Everything." I stared at the drive. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a setup. Weston hadn't just replaced me with a younger model. He had picked a fall girl. "Get in," I said. The word felt like ice. She slid into the passenger seat, the smell of her expensive perfume filling the small space. It was the same scent Weston used to buy for me on our anniversaries. My stomach turned. "Why me?" I asked, pulling back onto the road. "You could go to the police." "The police would arrest me the second they saw my name on those documents," Ava said, her voice cracking. "You're the only one who knows the firm's internal structure. You're the only one who can prove the signatures are forged before the warrants are issued. Please, Clara. I know I'm the villain in your story, but he's the one holding the match." I didn't answer. I drove in silence, the neon lights of the city blurring past us. My mind was a whirlwind of calculations. If what she said was true, Weston wasn't just a cheat. He was a predator who had spent a year planning the ultimate exit. "I'm taking you to my lawyer's office," I said. "If you're lying to me, I'll hand you to the authorities myself. But if you're telling the truth, then Weston Blake is about to find out that a foundation doesn't just hold a house up. It can also bury it." The lights in Sarah Vance's office were the only ones on in the entire building. Sarah sat across from us, her sharp eyes moving between me and Ava. On the desk sat the black drive, a ticking time bomb in the middle of the mahogany table. "Marcus is on his way," Sarah said, her voice gravelly from lack of sleep. "If this drive has what you say it has, we have exactly 4 hours before the banks open and the flight takes off." When Marcus arrived, the room transformed into a digital war zone. He plugged the drive in, his fingers flying across the keys. The screens illuminated the dark room with rows of red numbers and legal filings. "He's been busy," Marcus whispered, his face pale. "Clara, he didn't just borrow from the pension fund. He's emptied the payroll account for next month. He's drained the client escrow. He was going to leave 500 employees without a paycheck and a dozen clients bankrupt." I felt a surge of nausea. These were people I knew. People who had been at our wedding. People who had held Sophie when she was a baby. And here it is. Marcus pointed to a highlighted section. The Ava Vance Holding Group. He used her identity to create a shell company. All the stolen funds were routed through here before being sent to an untraceable terminal in Singapore. Ava let out a sob, covering her face with her hands. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "It doesn't matter what you knew," Sarah snapped. "It matters what we can prove. Marcus, can we stop the Singapore transfer?" "No," Marcus said, his eyes glued to the screen. "It's a timed release. But since Clara is still technically a primary admin on the original firm's mainframe, we can do something better. We can't stop the money from leaving the firm, but we can change where it goes after it hits the shell company. I looked at the clock. 3:45 a.m. Where can we send it? I asked. Back, I said, the realization hitting me with total clarity. We send it back to the pension fund and the payroll account. We fill the holes he dug before anyone notices they're empty. We make it look like the money never left. And the offshore account? Sarah asked. The $4 million he's planning to live on in Dubai? I looked at Ava, then back at the screen. My hand was steady as I reached for the mouse. That goes into a restricted trust for Clara. A trust that requires 2 signatures to withdraw. Mine and a court-appointed guardian. He won't be able to touch a cent of it, and if he tries, it'll trigger a fraud alert in 3 different countries. For the next 2 hours, the only sound was the clicking of keys and the hum of the server. We were rewriting the ending of Weston's perfect plan. Every time he thought he had won, we were quietly moving the goalposts. At 5:15 a.m., Marcus hit enter one last time. It's done. The firm is whole. The trust is funded. And the shell company. Well, it's now an empty shell. I stood up and walked to the window. The sky was turning a pale, sickly gray. Now what? Ava asked, looking up at me. Now, I said, we go to the airport. I want to see the look on his face when his getaway turns into a dead end. Sarah stood up, grabbing her coat. I'll call the board members. By the time he realizes the money is gone, he won't have a job to come back to, even if he stays. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass. I didn't see the broken woman from the kitchen floor anymore. I saw a warrior who had finally reclaimed her territory. Weston Blake thought he was playing a game of chess. He forgot that I was the one who taught him the rules. The airport was a ghost town at 5:30 a.m., filled only with the hum of floor buffers and the distant chime of flight announcements. I stood by the glass partitions of the international terminal, my heart a steady, cold drumbeat in my chest. Beside me, Ava looked like she was walking toward a firing squad. She had traded her gold gala dress for a trench coat, but her hands were still shaking. He'll be at gate B12, she whispered. He told me he had business and would meet me at the penthouse later today. He was never going to call, was he? No, Ava, I said, my eyes scanning the crowd of travelers. He was going to let you wake up to a frozen bank account and a police knock at your door. Then I saw him. Weston was walking with a stride that screamed freedom. He was wearing a casual linen suit, a leather carry-on slung over his shoulder, and a fedora pulled low. He looked like a man going on a permanent vacation. He didn't have a care in the world because he thought he had successfully erased his past. I stepped out from behind a pillar, blocking his path. He stopped dead. The color drained from his face so fast it was like someone had pulled a plug. He looked at me, then his eyes flickered to Ava standing behind me. The confusion on his face turned into a sharp, ugly realization. Clara, he stammered, trying to pull back his mask of charm. What are you doing here? And why are you with her? I'm here to wish you a safe flight, Weston, I said, my voice projecting through the terminal. Though I imagine the weather in Singapore is a bit different when you arrive with an empty bank account. He laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm going on a scouting trip for the merger. The merger is dead, Weston, I said, stepping closer. And the $4 million you moved into Ava's shell company? It's gone. Or rather, it's back. The pension fund is full again. The payroll is cleared. And the rest? It's in a trust for Sophie that you can't touch without a court order from a judge who already has a copy of your forged signatures. He dropped his bag. The thud echoed against the linoleum. You can't do that. That's my money. I built that firm. You built it on my back, I countered. And you tried to burn it down on hers. But I'm the architect, remember? I know where the supports are. I pulled them. He turned to Ava, his face contorting with rage. You little brat. You gave her the drive? I gave you everything. I was going to set you up for life. You were going to set me up for prison. Ava shouted back, her voice finally finding its strength. I saw the flight manifest, Weston. 1 seat. 1 name. You were leaving us both to drown. Security started to drift toward us, sensing the escalating tension. Weston looked around frantically, like a trapped animal. He reached into his pocket, likely for his phone to check his accounts, but I already knew what he'd see.
0.
The board of directors is meeting at 9 a.m., I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm. They have the forensic audit. They have the recordings. You can get on that plane, Weston. You can go to Singapore. But the minute you land, there will be an international red notice waiting for you. Or you can walk out of here, sign the full confession Sarah Vance has prepared, and we might, just might, let you walk away without a felony charge. He looked at the gate. The now boarding sign was flickering. His dream of a tropical escape was dying right in front of him. He looked back at me, and for the first time in our entire marriage, I saw him for what he truly was, a small, cowardly man who couldn't survive without someone else to bleed dry. I hate you, he whispered. I know, I replied. That's how I knew I was doing the right thing. The weeks following the airport confrontation were a blur of legal meetings and damage control. The news of the near collapse of Weston's firm hit the local papers, but because we had moved the money back so quickly, the scandal was contained. To the public, Weston was retiring for personal reasons. To the board, he was a thief who had been caught by the one person he underestimated. I moved into the guest room of our house. I couldn't stand to sleep in the bed we had shared. Every corner of the house felt like it was haunted by the lies he'd told. One afternoon, a week after the resignation, the doorbell rang. It was a courier. He handed me a legal-sized envelope. Inside was a letter from a lawyer I didn't recognize, representing the Ava Vance estate. Ava had left the city. She had gone back to her parents' home in the Midwest, but she had sent me something. It was a check for $50,000, the value of the jewelry and clothes Weston had bought her with stolen money. Attached was a note. Sold it all. It's not much compared to what he took, but it belongs to the firm's pension fund. Thank you for not letting me go to jail for a man who didn't love either of us. I stared at the check. It was a start, but the real challenge was upstairs. Sophie had stopped asking when Daddy was coming home. She had started asking why Mommy was always on the phone with lawyers. I walked up to her room and found her sitting by the window, drawing a picture of our house. In the drawing, there were only two people, a tall woman with a cape and a little girl. Hey, Bug, I said, sitting on the edge of her bed. What are you working on? It's us, she said, not looking up. We're the strong team now, right? My throat tightened. Yeah, baby, we're the strong team. Is Daddy ever coming back? She asked, her voice small. Not to live here, I said, choosing honesty over a comfortable lie. Daddy made some choices that hurt people, and he has to go far away to learn how to be a better person. But I am always here. I am never, ever leaving. She nodded, seemingly satisfied, and went back to her drawing. That night, I sat in the dark living room with a glass of wine and the final divorce decree. Weston had signed everything. He was living in a cheap motel on the outskirts of the state, his assets frozen, his reputation in tatters. He had tried to call me once, begging for just a few thousand to get back on his feet. I had blocked the number before he could finish the sentence. I looked at the mark on my ring finger. It was fading. The skin was starting to look normal again. I pulled out a notepad and wrote one word at the top: foundation. I didn't want to just be a survivor. I wanted to build something that protected others from the kind of storm I had just endured. I realized that my 12 years of managing the books, managing the house, and managing Weston's ego had given me a skill set that was invaluable. I wasn't just a wife. I was a strategist. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of empowerment. It was like a light turning on in a room that had been dark for a decade. Weston thought he took my life when he chose his mistress. He didn't realize he had accidentally given me back my soul. But just as I was about to close my eyes, my laptop dinged. It was an email from Marcus. The subject line read, "You need to see this." He didn't act alone. My blood ran cold. I opened the attachment. It was a series of encrypted emails between Weston and my brother-in-law. The betrayal hadn't just been in my marriage.
It was in my bloodline.
I stared at the screen until the letters blurred into jagged lines of black and white. It wasn't just Weston. The emails were time-stamped months ago, addressed to my brother-in-law, Julian. Julian, the man who had sat at our Thanksgiving table and toasted to our unshakable bond. Julian, who had hugged me when my mother died and told me I was the sister he never had. The emails were cold, mechanical. She's suspicious, Weston. Move the assets to the offshore shell now. I've cleared the internal audit trail on my end. Just make sure her name is on the secondary filings, so we have a shield. Julian wasn't just a bystander. He was the architect's assistant. He had been the one cleaning the books from the inside of the firm while I was busy raising Clara and trusting them both. They hadn't just betrayed me. They had weaponized my trust to build a vault for themselves. I felt a roar of silence in my ears. The betrayal of a husband is a wound, but the betrayal of family is a slow-acting poison. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I called Julian. Hey, Clara, he answered, his voice smooth, practiced. How are you holding up? Martha said you've been firm with Weston. We're all worried about you. I'm sure you are, Julian, I said, my voice as sharp as a razor. I'm so worried that I'm sitting here looking at a thread of emails from a private server. You know, the one with the internal audit notes. The silence on the other end was absolute. I could almost hear his heart stopping through the receiver. Clara, listen. No, you listen, I interrupted, my tone dropping to a dangerous whisper. Weston is already at the bottom of the ocean. Do you really want to join him? Because right now, I have enough evidence to make sure you never work in finance again. I have enough to make sure Martha finds out exactly how her other favorite son helped steal from his own niece's future. What do you want? He croaked. The mask had slipped. The brother was gone. Only the thief remained. I want the keys to the backup server in the Cayman office, I said. And I want a written statement, notarized by tomorrow morning, detailing every single person who touched those accounts. If you miss one name, Julian, I send the whole file to the district attorney. I hung up before he could beg. I walked to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. My reflection looked back at me, pale, determined, and entirely unrecognizable from the woman who had cried in the rain 3 weeks ago. I realized then that justice wasn't just about stopping the man who left. It was about cleaning the house of everyone who helped him walk out the door. The next morning, a thick manila envelope was sitting on my porch. No courier this time. Julian had delivered it himself under the cover of darkness. Inside was everything. The passwords, the name. My phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. No text, just a photo. It was a picture of a park bench in a city I didn't recognize. On the bench sat Weston. He looked old. He looked tired. He was eating a sandwich out of a paper bag. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel revenge. I felt nothing. He was just a stranger in a linen suit that didn't fit anymore. I deleted the photo. I realized that the choice Weston made that rainy night wasn't a choice between me and a mistress. It was a choice between his ego and his integrity. He chose his ego, and it had consumed him. I stood up and walked into the kitchen, where Clara was waiting with a book. Mom, she asked, looking up. Are you happy? I looked at the house that was no longer a crime scene, but a sanctuary. I looked at the daughter who saw me as a hero, not a victim. I'm more than happy, honey, I said, kissing her forehead. I'm free. The storm was over. The foundation was solid. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for someone else to tell me the story. I was the one writing it. Just as the dust seemed to settle, a new storm rolled in. I was sitting in my new corner office, the one that finally felt like it belonged to me, when Sarah Vance walked in without knocking. Her face was grim, her usual sharp eyes clouded with worry. He's suing, Clara, she said, dropping a thick stack of legal documents on my desk. Weston isn't going away quietly. He's filed for a wrongful termination and is claiming spousal coercion regarding the confession he signed. I leaned back, a cold laugh escaping my lips. Spousal coercion? He was the one who abandoned us in a thunderstorm. He's desperate, Sarah explained. He's broke, his mistress is gone, and he has nothing left to lose. He's hired a bottom-feeder lawyer who specializes in high-conflict divorces. They're going to try to paint you as a cold, calculating woman who trapped her husband to steal his company. The trial was set for 3 weeks later. It was a media circus. "The Revenge of the Ex-Wife" was the headline on every local news station. I had to walk through a gauntlet of cameras every morning, my chin held high, while reporters shouted questions about my secret motives. Inside the courtroom, Weston looked different. He had traded the linen suit for a cheap, ill-fitting charcoal one. He looked smaller, humbler, a calculated move to garner sympathy from the jury. When he took the stand, he put on a masterclass in manipulation. "I was in a dark place," he testified, his voice cracking on cue. "Clara was distant. She cared more about the books than our marriage. I made a mistake, yes, but she used that mistake to blackmail me into giving up my life's work. She held my daughter over my head like a weapon." I felt the eyes of the jury on me. I saw the doubt flickering in some of them. To them, I was the powerful CEO, and he was the man who had lost everything. "Your witness," his lawyer said, smirking at Sarah. Sarah didn't stand up. She looked at me and nodded. We had prepared for this. We didn't need to argue with his lies. We just needed to show the truth he thought he had deleted. "Mr. Blake," Sarah said, her voice echoing in the silent room. "You claim you were coerced. You claim you didn't want to leave your family. Then perhaps you can explain these?" She hit a button on her remote, and the large monitors in the courtroom flickered to life. It wasn't an email. It was a video. It was footage from a hidden security camera Weston had installed in his own office, one he'd forgotten about in his rush to flee. The video showed Weston and Julian, months before the split, laughing as they toasted with expensive scotch. To the anchor, Weston's voice boomed from the speakers. "By the time she realizes the accounts are empty, we'll be on a beach in Singapore, and she'll be stuck explaining the mess to the feds. She's so predictable. She'll stay and try to fix it while we vanish." The courtroom went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Weston's humble expression shattered. He looked at the screen, then at me, his eyes wide with a panicked, animalistic fear. That was a joke," he stammered. "We were just blowing off steam." "A $4 million joke?" Sarah asked, her voice like a whip. "A joke that involved forging your wife's signature? A joke that involved leaving your 6-year-old daughter without a college fund?" The jury's doubt vanished. In that moment, the golden boy was revealed to be a common thief. The judge didn't just dismiss Weston's suit. He ordered him to pay my legal fees and referred the case back to the district attorney for criminal fraud. Julian, seeing the writing on the wall, turned state's evidence to avoid jail time, losing his license and his family's respect in the process. A month later, I stood on the balcony of my home, looking out at the city. The rain was falling again, but this time, it was peaceful. It felt like it was washing away the last of the grime. Clara came out and stood beside me, slipping her hand into mine. She was older now, her eyes filled with a quiet strength that made me proud every single day. "We did it, Mom," she whispered. "We did, Bug," I said. I realized then that my story wasn't about the day my husband chose his mistress. That was just the prologue. My story was about the day I chose myself. I learned that betrayal is a fire. It can either consume you until you're nothing but ash, or it can forge you into something unbreakable. I chose to be forged. I learned that you cannot build a life on someone else's shadow. You have to be your own light. I learned that karma isn't always a lightning bolt from the sky. Sometimes, karma is just the natural consequence of being a person who builds their happiness on the pain of others. And justice? Justice is the quiet satisfaction of knowing that while they were busy trying to destroy you, you were busy building a foundation they could never shake. To anyone out there sitting in the dark, feeling like the rain will never stop, look at your hands. They are stronger than you think. Look at your heart. It can survive more than you know. Don't wait for an apology that will never come. Don't wait for them to realize your worth. Realize it yourself, and then build a life that is so big, so bright, and so beautiful that their memory becomes nothing more than a footnote in your masterpiece. You are the architect of your own recovery, and the foundation starts today. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you've lived through something similar, share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.